1979 then marked the beginning of the resurgence or the comeback of religion. And incidentally, from that time, many books have been written. In fact, one interesting book I read a few months ago is titled God is Back. And after I read the book, I asked myself, did God ever go anywhere? Or we pushed him back and now we brought him in? But precisely because by the 1970s, religion was just all over. Now, this had implication for the secularization theory. But more so, in 1979, there was a revolution also in Ghana. And that revolution was important in a sense that, of course, led by our immediate late president, George Rawlings. The 1979 revolution was important for religion because it coincided with the rise of the charismatic movement, beginning with Duncan Williams, who established the Christian Action Faith Ministry in 1979, after he had received training under Ida Hosa in Nigeria in 1979-78. So you could see that the 1979 in history is very important. Now, entering into the 1980s, again, Ghana registered the presence of Nation of Islam, what many will consider a cult of Islam or one of the splinter groups within Islam. So Nation of Islam registered their presence in Ghana. In the same way, around the 1980s, the Shia Islam also registered their presence in Ghana. And so 1979, the 1980s were very important for the rise of religion, not just globally, but also in Ghana. But this has implication for the secularization theory. Did the secularization thesis fail? That, for me, is the question. And my argument is that it did not fail, not that religion didn't die, and not that God didn't go away, but precisely what happened was that there was the subjectivity of the individual in the expression of religion. So instead of religious authorities enforcing code of ethics on individuals hook, line, and sinker, by virtue of the secularization agenda, individuals then had the right to determine where they identify in terms of religion. So again, entering into the 1990s, we had what Samuel Huntington calls the third wave of democratization, where many countries in the third world countries had to democratize in order to receive support from the Bretton Woods institutions, precisely the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And one of the tenets of liberalization was religious freedom. So in Ghana, by 1992, we adopted, quote and unquote, secular constitution that guaranteed freedom of religious expression. What all this mean in terms of the veil is that individuals could determine what they want to do with their bodies and their hair without suffering any state-sponsored type of persecution. And even in families, when a young lady decides not to wear the veil, that person cannot be persecuted precisely because the Constitution of Ghana reigns supreme over religious laws and religious doctrines. So for me, instead of arguing that the secularization theory failed, I think we should look at it in terms of how it emboldened individuals to critique religion and to determine where they identify with religion. So having given that background, I want to talk about the hair. What is it about the hair such that it is such an important part of the human body that women and to some extent men in Islam have to cover their hair? Now, in many societies of the world, one of the general characteristics of human being is our penchant for meaning. We tend to seek meaning and make meaning as well. So many sociologists and anthropologists have concluded that man is a meaning-seeking being and a meaning-making being. So we try to make sense of virtually everything around us, including the contemporary COVID-19. So the hair is not just a biological species, but it is also a cultural construct that signifies, it has a certain signification in terms of how society is organized. And so in many cultures in Ghana, including the Ewe and the Akan, older women tended to cover their hair. And for many of these cultures, it was a symbol of seniority. So when an Akan woman got to a certain age in life, one way of signifying her age to imply seniority was to cover the hair. And then the other thing is that among the Akan, some Akan groups in the past, when a baby was born, the hair of the baby was shaved and then hid somewhere, because those were the days people were traveling. They didn't have the benefit of technology to track people. So in the event that the person is reported through divination to have died, they buried the hair because the hair represented the human person among some Akan groups. Now, among a northern group like the Nahuri, when someone, a Nahuri in the northern region, when a person died in Accra, usually it was difficult to convey the body back to the northern region for burial. And so what they did was that they would take a species of the hair, the fingernails, and then the toenails for burial in northern region, because the hair is the upper part of man or woman or human beings to be general. And then the fingers represent the middle. And then the toe represents the lower part of man. So the hair, the fingernails, and then the toenails represent the totality of the human person. And so in many cases, such parts of the body were carried to where the person came from for burial. And this was precisely because of the politics of what is called home. Because home for many people is where your womb is, or where you were born, or where you trace your ancestry. Having said that, many cultures, as I did indicate, had the knowledge of the veil. So they were veiling, including some cultures in northern region. Covering the hair was very important. Now, later in Islamic history, especially in Ghanaian folk Islam, I'm using folk Islam advisedly, because sometimes what they mean by Islam may be cultural or traditions that have infiltrated into the religion and designated Islam. And the same thing even happens to Christianity. I'll talk about it in a moment. So in Mamobi community, like other Zongo communities, when a lady exposed the hair at a certain point in the night, the lady was believed to be inviting the jinns or evil spirit that could manipulate her. Sometimes she may run insane. So in many Zongo communities, of course, including Mamobi, there are religious functionaries or experts who have specialized in jinns eviction. And one entry point for the jinn, as far as women were concerned, was the hair, a hair that was left exposed. So these were some of the reasons that were incorporated into the covering of the hair. Having said this, I've argued that the veiling predated Islam because it was there before Islam was introduced into what became known as the Gold Coast and now Ghana in the 14th century. Of course, Islam was in Ghana about a century before Christianity. Now, the type of Islam or the means of the propagation of Islam in the Gold Coast, now Ghana, shaped the discourse around the veil, precisely because unlike Northern Africa, where Islam penetrated for political reasons in the 7th century, in the case of so-called sub-Saharan Africa, where Islam penetrated beginning in the latter part of the 9th century and then 12th century and then the 14th century, the main motive for the proselytization of Islam was primarily economic. And whether political or economic has implications in terms of the politics of the veil. So politically, Islam in North Africa was both for Arabization and Islamization. What this implied was that the people were not only to be converted, but they had to be Arabized. They had to speak Arabic and they had to live like Arabs. In the case of so-called sub-Saharan Africa, because it was economic in motif, there was no consensus, or there was hardly consensus effort to Islam became Muslims. In fact, in the Western Sudanese empires, including Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, and all these Hausa land, the people, Islam was seen as a palace religion. So it didn't penetrate deep into the people or among the people. And because of that, the veil was not a topical issue for these Muslims who were primarily interested in economic activities. So at that time, in the case of Western Africa, The type of Islam that became dominant was the Sufi type of Islam. And research has shown that the Sufi type of Islam tends to be accommodative of indigenous cultures. Indeed, this has been negated by scholars, one Ghanaian scholar called John Alembele Azuma in his book, The Arab Muslim Legacy in Africa. But precisely, we can argue that the Sufi Muslims tended to have integrative approach to engaging in proselytization. They were more accommodative and they were quite liberal in terms of incorporating indigenous worldviews in the spread of the religion. So by the 1980s, as I said, religion received sporadic resurgence all over the world. And in Ghana, the same thing happened. Now, in the case of Ghana, another type or brand of Islam emerged, and that was Sunni Islam. Of course, Sunni Islam had always been there, but in terms of national politics, it was Sufi Islam that was much recognized, precisely because of the politics Nkrumah himself played with Sufi Islam, especially with the intervention of Ibrahim Niasse in the politics of Ghana, including the building of Akosombo. So the Sufis tended to have some level of leverage or advantage over Sunni type of Islam. But by 1994 thereabout, the Sunni Muslims united under Hajj Umar. And so from 1980s, as I mentioned, there was a mobilization of the Sunni Muslims, which crystallized in 1994 when nationally they united under Hajj Umar, whom I have interviewed before. So when they got united, what then happened was that Sunni Muslim countries started, sponsoring, offering scholarship to Muslim youth to go and study in the Sunni Muslim world, including Kuwait, including Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and then Lebanon, of course, and to some extent Syria, to study Islam. Now, many of these individuals were trained, as it were, to purify or to reform Islam, which they thought had been adulterated by Sufi Muslims. Remember, I said the Sufis had a liberal attitude towards indigenous cultures. And so I remember in the 1990s, quite a number of my primary and senior high school mates left for Egypt or any of these Arab countries to study Islam. Now, the point was that when these individuals went, they studied essentially Islam. So they studied the Tawheed, the Islamic concept of the oneness of Allah. They studied history, and then they studied the interpretation of Islam or the Quran. And all these things largely were done in Arabic. But the motive for this was for evangelism, which in Islam is called dawah. And the dawah was to restore Islam to what people thought its first century glory. So there was that agenda. So 1990s became a very difficult or a very episodic moment for religious expression in Ghana. That was the time when there was a renewed interest in the veil. And since that time, the veil has become a religious object of politicization, depending on which political party is in power. Now, the main bone of contention around the veil is the question of Ghana's supposedly secular status. So if Ghana is secular, what should happen to the public sphere? And one of my colleagues on the line has written on secularization and the veil. But I would say that the secularization thesis advances what is called a naked public square, where faith is supposed to be bracketed so that when you enter the public sphere, you enter as a religious person without your religious difference manifesting. So that is what many people consider to be the naked public square. And given that the veil itself is a signifier of religion, people became concerned. Do we want uniformity, or we want a kind of uniformity that endorses diversity? So this has been the debate in Ghana, and it is still ongoing. And I don't think of course, Mahama in 2015 said that it was not right for Muslim nurses, Muslim peoples and students, especially at the basic level and senior high level, to be forced to remove the veil. If you recall, in 2015, there was a case in Takrady where Muslim female peoples who were to register for the BEC were forced to take the veil because they had to take an ID picture, and it became a big issue, leading to demonstration all over the place. In my own case, when I was in Ghana for field work last year, I participated in a walk, in a long walk, a soft kind of demonstration from Nima all the way to Obrasport in Circle, you know, talking about the need for the veil to be publicly and constitutionally recognized. And one of the placards that people heard was that the veil is my identity. And many Muslim youth said that the veil doesn't cover our brain, it covers our heads. So not the brain. So for them, they felt the veil should be allowed into the public sphere. And we heard Mustafa Hamid, Dr. Mustafa Hamid, coming out strongly to say that Muslims will not accept any effort by Islamophobia that they think is emerging in Ghana. But regardless of all this debate, I think that the veil has a certain sociological and ethical implication for many Muslims, in the sense that it is not just a mark of identity, because identity without function is baseless. So you identify largely based on what you do or do not do. So if a female Muslim wears the hijab or the veil, it gives her not just identity, but it also shapes her behavior in the public sphere. So for example, in Bamobi, there are a number of Muslim women who go to, let's say, Action Chapel around the Spintex Road. And there are a few who go to a certain church, Pastor Prince, somewhere in Newtown. And when they are when they are leaving the community, they have their veil on. But once they get to where they are to join the Christian service, they take off the veil. Or when they get to a safe distance where they know nobody's watching or nobody knows them, they take off the veil. So my understanding is that the veil then shapes the action and inaction of Muslim women. And the rise of the veil itself is also challenging the secular thesis in Ghana. But more specifically, Islam argues that both men and women are to veil. In fact, that is what many of the sheikhs I interviewed in the course of this paper told me. So why then is it that women are compelled to wear it, and men tend to have a certain level of liberality as far as the veil wearing is concerned? My provisional argument is in itself based on the positionality of women in the family and the spread of religion. Because women are the homemakers, they take care of children. And in almost all religions, women are key, they are central, even as they perform expressive responsibilities in passing on the religion of the family to the children. Much of it is done by women, especially when the children are very young. So as part of the socialization of children to imbibe family religions, it is women who play central role. You know, so for me, that is important, so that women, if women are kept within an imaginative definition of Islam or Islamic boundaries, what that will mean is that the religious values will pass on to the younger generation. Now, the other point I want to mention is that when women wear the veil, it helps them to also negotiate for attention within their own interaction in the public sphere. But what is important to me is the extent to which Muslim women have invested in the veil, what I call the sartorial value of the veil. So the veil has not just become an object that people wear, but it has become an object of expressing beauty. You know, Chinua Achebe said in his book, Things Fall Apart, and when the hunters learn to shoot without missing, the birds must learn to fly without perching. So if Muslim women are compelled to wear the veil, then for many of them, the veil becomes something that they can appropriate or they can use as agency to express their needs, their desires, and their beauty expressions. You know, and I interviewed a few Muslim women. One woman told me that, a young lady told me that, Adini Kadang, Rayuwa Kadang, what that means is that a little bit of faith, a little bit of life. So for this very lady, the veil, she uses the veil in ways that also attract attention. You know, to the point that many Muslim ladies appeal to their suitors on the basis of the veil that they wear. So you can see, for example, this type of veil. You know, it is not just to cover the hair, but it is also to express aesthetic value. it is part of expressing beauty. And in terms of how Muslim women or young women negotiate in conjugal relationship, because in our culture, it is difficult for a woman to express interest in a man. So for many of these Muslim women, the veil becomes a mark of piety to show that, look, I'm the type of woman that wears the veil, and that when you marry, you have comfort and peace at home. So in expressing piety, the veil becomes a means of expressing beauty and a means of living what they think is modern or is fashionable. So you can see this woman. Now, this type of veil ordinarily would have covered every part of the body, including the neck. But even our mothers are not left out. They also wear the veil in ways that express beauty. Now, look at this picture. So here, this picture was taken just when she had finished praying. So when she's praying, the way she wears the veil, covering the neck, the shoulders, and the upper arms are very obvious because those things are not to be seen in public. But outside of the prayer domain, or what I would call the sacred space, the veil becomes an object that is used as a agentic one to express the sense of beauty. And if you recall, in 2016, when Mrs. Baumia, Samira Baumia, was campaigning for the husband, she was covered all the time. So the arms and everywhere was covered. But just when the MPP won in 2017, she started using the veil differently. And it resulted in agitations within the Muslim communities. Some saying she's a hypocrite and all that because they thought she had abused the veil and she was not representing Islam enough. So before this, at least to conclude, I would say that the politics of the veil should not be looked at only as an object or so-called object of oppressing Muslim women, but also as something that they have deployed and used to express their own sense of beauty and agency as individuals within a Muslim-dominated community. Thank you very much, Godiani Kebaku, which is, I give you thanks. So at this point, I'll end and then I'll take questions and contributions from listeners.
Yeah, Charles, couple of questions or contributions. Yes. I thought that for the Akan, the women cover their hair, which is the hair gear that they wear, as a form of protecting the hair rather than cultural or religious or a sign of respect, as you said. In terms of seniority.
Yeah.
So until today, I haven't thought of that. But I thought that, because they wear that to protect them when they go to farm or when they're going out and that kind of thing, from the dust, particularly those in the rural areas. So I didn't know about the religious element of this. And then in terms of the relationship between men and women in terms of religion, not only Islam alone. I think that that is very unequal in all religions, because for me, religion has been led by men, and therefore most of the rules and regulations and all those things have been fashioned by men, even sometimes fashioned by men but enforced by women. And so therefore, in terms of that, there is a question of inequality in that area. I mean, for example, you were saying that some of the Muslim women use it to attract, as an appeal for men. But when I worked in race relations and worked with Black and minority ethnic groups, particularly within the Asian community, Muslims would Bangladeshis and Pakistanis. The impression I got from the young women who have been born here, never gone to Pakistan or Bangladesh, but have parents who are strongly Muslim, insisting on them covering up. They told me that if they don't do that, their parents want them to marry Muslim men, and therefore they will not be seen as good Muslims. So in a kind of way, they are being coerced into conforming, because if you don't dress that way, then you'll be seen as not suitable for marriage, So those are some of the issues I have with some of the things that you said.
Yeah, thank you. Debbie, can I respond quickly? All right, so I will say that, I mean, thank you so much for the observation and the comments you've made. Yes, so you are right. In many Akan communities, when women carry things to prevent the soil from entering into their hair, they will cover it. But in terms of the cultural significance, that was what I was interested in terms of the fact that for older women, it determines, or it's a mark of their age, a mark of seniority in society. Now, that is why in many cases, when there's funeral, if you observe, many women tend to cover their hair. And in some cultures, actually, including the Ashanti, when an elderly person dies, the women relatives shave their hair in a certain way. Especially during mourning period, they shave their hair as a signifier of the mourning mood within which they find themselves. The other thing has to do with religion and patriarchy. Yes, you are right. And that's why I said that women tend to be very instrumental in the survival of religion itself, because women are primary caretakers. They are primary agents of socialization. So if women are considered to have imbibed the religious values, what many people think is that they can pass it on easily to the younger generation. And that is why, whether in Christianity or in Islam, women tend to be guarded. People tend to pay much attention to women. So in Islam, for example, a Muslim woman cannot marry a non-Muslim man. And in Christianity, in some churches, a Christian woman can equally not even marry somebody from a different Christian denomination. So, and why? The answer for me is the centrality of women, as I keep saying, in the socialization processes of children and passing on of the religion. Now, in terms of the inequality in religion, of course, I've answered that, but Muslim minority in the UK or in Europe. Yes, so the thing about minority in a dominant culture is the idea of identity. So that when Hiscovis, for example, who was an anthropologist, studied African Americans in the United States of America, or let's say Americas, and wanted to know whether they retained their African identity or African cultures. Now, his motive for that research was to argue that, look, African Americans have been assimilated because there was racism. So have they really been assimilated, or they've not? And to support anti-racist agenda, he said that they've been assimilated, until he went to Benin and later in Nigeria and did field work, that he realized that indeed African Americans had retained much of their cultures. So I think that minority group would always want to keep their identity, because that is the only way they perpetuate themselves. So that is one. The other thing is that migration issues has its own politics. So the question of who should tolerate who. Is it a dominant culture that should tolerate the visiting culture, or vice versa? And that is why the hijab became a topical issue in France. The question of whether Muslims who are in the minority, as it were, should be tolerated, or they should be allowed to express themselves. So if you look at recent history in secularization theory, the epicenter was actually France. So I will say this for now, but I also say that minority is not so much also about the numbers as it is about the quality. So that Jews may constitute minority group, the Jewish groups may be minority in many countries, but they tend to have more power than other minority groups. Based on either certain eschatological teachings from the Bible that tends to privilege the Jews at some point. I'm not saying they were not persecuted, but it's a certain logic to which Jews are protected, let's say, by the larger Christian communities because of how the Bible constructs them. And then the second is that maybe because of a certain skill that they've acquired. So these are my responses to your comments.
Prempeh.
Yes.
Are there any sanctions for women who decide not to wear the veil?
All right. Can I answer? Yeah, I think that's a good question. So in many cases, you see, you suffer what I'll borrow Orlando Patterson's term, social death. You know, so there is no written code that if you don't wear the veil, imam will be, you'll be punished. You know, it is not there like that. Now, even if it is there that you should wear, what it means is that Ghana, as I said, that's why I brought a secular debate. The secular, as it were, constitution allows freedom of religious expression. So you can't coerce someone to wear the veil against the person's will. In fact, there's a paper, I'm doing a biographical work on a Muslim lady who has certainly refused to wear the veil as a child, and she's just finished her master's and she's working, she doesn't wear it. And she suffers a lot of stigmatization. So in that case, the punishment is what I call, borrowing Orlando Patterson's word, social death. So people will not want to associate with you, you'll be isolated, so that you'll be discriminated against. Sometimes your own family will speak ill of you. And if you're not lucky, you hardly get a man to marry. So for this woman, this Muslim lady I'm working on, her biography, what happens is that she's struggling to get even a Muslim man to marry. You see, and her family is actually also against she marrying a Christian man. She should be 34 now, 34 years. And she has not even had a stable relationship because many of the guys will come in hoping that she will veil, but she will say, no, I won't veil. She went to Israel for her master's. He went to Hebrew University. And over there too, people thought that, oh, as a Muslim, she wear the veil. She was not wearing it. And so she was earmarked for ostracization, some form of ostracization. In that case, it is difficult to appeal to the state because it is not something that you can easily tell that the person is being punished because of that. So I will call that they suffer social death.
So in this case, what can be done to, let's say, help this lady in question?
Well, I think this is a very difficult question because the lady in question, I will just mention her first name, Arifa. So Arifa, for her, in fact, the last time I interviewed her, the paper is almost read, but last time I interviewed her, you could see she's the easygoing type. She's like, I don't care, whatever they do. You know, and I think she's even prepared not to marry in the long run if nobody comes her way because she won't veil. So she calls herself a non-hijabi. So she's a non-hijabi. But I think what needs to be done is for a certain level of re-theologization in Islam. And that is why Muslims need to revisit ijma and ijtihad, which is consensus building. Because if you read the works of Amina Wadud, or if you read Ali Mazrui, in fact, Ali Mazrui had a very interesting statement in his book, Islam, Globalization and Terrorism. And I'm going to quote him. He says that, whereas the Quran is infallible, the interpreters of the Quran are fallible. So what this implies is that, you see, the Quran needs constant interpretation, okay? So that it needs to be interpreted to see how everybody could be accommodated in a pluralistic world or in a cosmopolitan world with individuals expressing different identities and uniqueness. Now, the other scholar whose work I think Muslims will find interesting is Ibn Khaldun. It's called the Muqaddimah. Now, in the Muqaddimah, when Ibn Khaldun of the 14th century was discussing any important topic that was difficult, he would say, Allah knows best. You know, and then Amina Wadud also calls for a reinterpretation of the Quran. She is arguing that the Quran has been male-centric, and it is about time it is exorcised of its male-centrism so that the Quran and Islamic practices will meet the contemporary times. The last Islamic scholar I'll quote is Ali Shariati, who was also a sociologist. And he argues that the Quran or religious language is symbolic and it must be interpreted. So I think Muslim leaders have to reinterpret the Quran and see what I will call preferred and prescribed practices. So for example, if a woman fails to wear the veil, would that deny her of Islamic identity? Would that deny her of Al-Jannah, which is heaven? Would that make her a lesser Muslim than the one who veils? In any case, when I joined the walk or the SOP demonstration, there were women, Muslim ladies wearing trousers. Elsewhere, Muslim women are not allowed to wear trousers. So even those campaigning that we want the hijab, they were wearing trousers. And that was for me, what we call the tension within religious and modernity debate. You see, that's the interlocking tension.
Okay, Prempeh, thank you very much. I also want to find out, so that there's a difference between the niqab and then the hijab. And why do the women wear the niqab, the one that covers their nose and mouth, leaving the eyes?
Okay, Kauta, are you around? I'll let Kauta respond to that. Is Kauta around?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much. So the niqab is basically the face veil. And so the one that covers the face, leaving just the eyes. And then hijab is what Prempeh has just talked about. So hijab is meant for covering the hair, the neck, and part of the bosom. So depending on what type of hijab you want and which particular cultural context you find yourself. Now we have people who wear hijabs that covers from head to toe. So we have head to toe hijab, we have head to knee hijab, we have head to bosom hijab, and also the other hijabs that Prempeh also showed on his presentation. Yes, so as far as niqab or face veil is concerned, most scholars are of the view that it is not compulsory. Okay, it is not compulsory.
So there's no spiritual
significance
between the hijab and then the niqab. So it's just, just a way of fashion to appease the men, or because some people say they cover themselves just because you have to keep yourself chaste for your husband. Yeah, so I just want to understand whether the difference is mainly probably a cultural something, or there's a spiritual inference to that.
All right. Okay. Can I come in? All right. So let me say that.
Yes, please do.
Yeah. Okay. So for example, if you look at in Mamobi and other Zongo communities, when you see a woman fully covered in the like of the hijab, and the niqab, sometimes they are widowed. All right. Yes. You see, they are widowed, and as part of the widowhood right, not just in Islam but in other cultures in Ghana, the women have to keep themselves from the public view. All right. So if in the event that this woman is to appear in public, she has to be fully covered. All right. She has to be fully covered. So that is what I have observed in Mamobi and other Zongo communities, especially widows. That's what they do. At least in the period that they go to the widowhood right, which is about 3 months, they have to, keep indoors. And all that. Now, if for any reason they are to step out, they have to be fully covered. That is one. Now, as to whether there's it is religiously sanctioned. Again, as I said, the veil itself predated Islam. Okay, it was there before the advent of Islam. In fact, it was a Middle Eastern cultural practices. Okay, that predated, so that even in the Jewish communities or the Semitic cultures, people were veiling. Now, what religion tends to do is that religion operates within cultures. So in many cases, some scholars have even argued that every religion is syncretic because it borrows and operates through the cultures within which it comes into contact with. In fact, let me quote one scholar who said, he's called Impatiba. He said that religion is like a moving water. Just as water is colorless, so is religion. Water takes the color of the soil it comes into contact with. Religion also takes the color or the cultural shape of the culture it comes into contact. So that if, for example, Islam had been revealed to, let's say, the Gan, the Gan culture would have been used to express Islam. So unfortunately, people canonize the culture into which religion was born and make it the religion. And so it's difficult to separate religion from culture. So that's what I would say to that.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
So did you notice any differences in the way veils or mayafi are worn in Mamobi as compared to Nima, Pig Farm, Newtown, Kutubabi, or even Madina Zongo Junction?
Very good question. I think the difference actually will come from age grades or age groups, because the communities you mentioned are sister communities and they tend to share a lot in common. You know, so Mam will be a Nima as sister communities. Mam will be a Newtown as sister. In fact, Kauta is doing, as I said, her work in Medina. And yesterday, the two of us were talking about the fact that if you look at Medina and Kaswa and Ashaman and Newtown, they are the same people who are in Mamobi and Nima. Precisely because Medina emerged because Nkrumah wanted to redevelop Nima and Mamobi. And that's why Medina opened up, and that's why Kaswa opened up, and that's why Ashaman also opened up. So they tend to share the same cultures of the wearing of the veil. Ideas, diffuse among these communities in almost the same length and the same breadth. Now, the difference would be the age group. So mothers tend to be moderate, not moderate in terms of valorization, but moderate in terms of the way they expose maybe their face, their neck, and things like that. But in important ways, they are all the same. I think Kauta has raised her hand, so may she want to contribute.
Please, can I go on?
Yes, please, yes.
Hello, please, can I go on? Can you hear me, please?
Yeah, please, we can hear you, yes.
Okay. So I just noted, yes, I just noted a few things that I would like to draw your attention to. Like you talked about Sunni Islam and its relationship with the hijab as far as the history of Muslims in Ghana is concerned. What I would also advise is that I would like you to also pay attention to the activities of the wives of these Sunni men who were exposed to the Arab world. Because when they invited their wives to the Arab world, these women were also exposed to the Arab way of doing things, Arab Islam. And when these women came back home with their husbands, they started spreading Islam and also veiled like the Arab women. And so they ended up educating our Zongo women to also dress like that. So even our own Kaba and slate was an issue because it exposed part of the shoulders and it had a slit on the side of the leg. And these women criticized all that. So what I think is that, yes, the wives of these scholars who joined them back in the Arab world also played an important role in educating Zongo women on the hijab. And yes, the veil has become so important in Zongo that these days, even babies are asked to wear hijab. For instance, I attend a function with my baby and people keep asking, but why is she not wearing hijab? But she's too small for a hijab. Because if per Islamic teachings, a woman starts wearing the hijab at the age of puberty. Do you understand? But now even babies, and like you said, it's all linked to the ideas of exposing the hair and the fact that once you expose the hair, you are attracting evil genes to yourself. And so now babies are even forced to wear hijab. And these are some of the things that I would like to draw your attention to. And the issue of secularism. You know, Talal Assad argues that there's a very thin line between secularism and Christianity. Do you get it? The two are intertwined. I don't know, have you observed anything like that in Ghana? For me, I think it is one of the reasons why Muslim women are finding it very difficult to get the hijab into the public space. Because yes, we are not used to seeing a woman with the hijab occupying a higher position in the public space. Then all of a sudden, boom, you are seeing a woman with a hijab in that higher position as a manager, as a CEO. So it raises a lot of questions, and I would like you to also just look at that. Yes, secularism and then Christianity in Ghana. Is there any relationship? And is that why we are finding it difficult to penetrate into the public space with our hijab? Yeah, thank you.
All right, so let me respond by saying this. So Talal Assad, his work on secularization Islam and Christianity, I disagree with Talal Assad in terms of the historical genealogy of secularization, right? So you know, Talal Assad argues that the word secular was actually used by non-religious people who wanted to hide their religious identities. But historically, that is not true. You see, the word secular was used, especially in England, that, in fact, England still has a state religion, okay? So if, let's say, the Church of England were to transfer church property to the state, the process of transferring the property is called secularization, right? So that was what it means, that we are divesting the item of its religious value. We are making it secular, so to speak. Now, I also understand, so the idea of secular itself is part of the Christian history, because Jesus said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. So, and I understand that's what Talal Assad is arguing. So what Jesus meant by that was that, you see, Caesar is not God, and God is not Caesar. In fact, there's a paper I have under review on the state and religion in Ghana. I think Mr. Budu even read it when I wrote the first draft. Now, and my argument is that, yes, it is true that the idea of secular itself is a Christian legacy, in a sense that Christianity tended to bifurcate life, to say that let the politicians be, let the religious people be. But of course, in many cases, they interact. And if you look at, I think the decisive moment for this argument was the 15th century Reformation, which was not just a breaking of ecclesiastical powers, but also a disruption of secular or politics and religious divide. So that is very important. And in relation to Ghana, that it is true that much of what we call secular values are actually religious values that have been expunged of their religious roots. And so I agree. And that is why Nkrumah had to deal with the issue of religious pluralism. So if you read his most philosophical book, Conscientism, his main aim was that let all the traditions come together. So Conscientism was a synthesization of Islam, Christianity, and indigenous cultures to constitute Ghana. So I understand, because the values we claim are secular values, even in Ghana and the rest of the world, are religious values, and most probably Christian values. And in the case of Ghana, because of the Christian missionary influence in our education and in our political setup. In fact, even the governmentality, the politics that we have, you know, the so-called social contract of Hobbes, you know, Thomas Hobbes quoted extensively from the Bible in developing the social contract, which today constitutes the basis of secular governmentality. So I agree to that.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Just kind of drawing from something that was said towards the end about us in Ghana not being used to seeing women, Islamic women in particular, in high positions. Because I was about to ask, you know, what's the general opinion in Ghana around seeing people, especially people, let's say in uniform, in civil service, you know, in hijab. As a teacher in Ghana, I mean, obviously I had several Muslim students, but it was kind of odd the way I saw, especially my high school students, decide whether to wear hijab or not. So, you know, I had one particular student who sometimes, you know, some days she would come with a hijab, other days she wouldn't. And I remember overhearing someone asking her, like, is she going to wear it or not? Because I mean, with the dress code, we allow hijabs that match the uniform. But it was kind of unclear to me what the determining factor was. And I think it was actually a post I saw yesterday about police women in New Zealand being allowed to wear hijab now. And this was on, I think, BBC Pidgin. So a lot of the comments under were from Nigerians, talking about the image that was up there, and people were really complaining. I mean, that why should, someone was saying, oh, it doesn't make them look smart. And I replied, and I was just like, how does wearing a hijab make you look less presentable? So yeah, I kind of want to know how is it regarded in Ghana? I mean, it's true, now it's been brought up. It's true that you don't really see it much. So seeing someone like Samira, always with her hair covered, I mean, I think generally it's well regarded when she wears it because she's very fashionable, but I don't know generally.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much. Before I respond, I think my brother and my colleague from the University of Cape Coast all the way to Makerere, Kofi Achu Semanu Aje, has written something. Muslims will have to separate Islamization from Arabization. A lot of the things Muslims do are actually Arabic culture. It is about time they localized, contextualized Islam. I think that's a profound statement. So let me reply to your question. So in the 1990s, the group FOMWAG, Federation of Muslim Women Association of Ghana, actually started mobilizing because I remember Caltech's Professor Dr. Rabia Tuama were all involved, trying to sensitize the Ghanaian community that look, Muslim women too can occupy prominent positions and still remain Muslims. I think it is sometimes not just even the question of Muslim women, as it is in largely women in general. The colonial enterprise was patriarchal in nature, right? And the structure upon which it was built or laid was also patriarchal. And so even the education women received were not education that would prepare them for public service. So the idea of clerks and all that were male-oriented jobs. And so for women to actually now, present or stage their presence in the public sphere is a challenge to many people, and more so Muslim women who would want to come as they are, as they are in terms of their identity, right? So for me, that in itself is a challenge in terms of how people want to construct Ghana, right? Of course, Ghana is overwhelmingly Christian, but Ghana is not a Christian nation in terms of the constitution. And Ghana is equally not an atheistic country. Now, what Ghana actually is that it's a religiously plural country, which means that every religion must have the freedom to be expressed, except when in exercising that freedom, an individual's right is jeopardized. Apart from that, I think every religion should have the right to equally find expression. So in that sense, yes, Muslim women are now rising, occupying big positions. Some are professors, others are lawyers. If you recall, in the early this year, one Muslim, Mohammed Tanku, who has been appointed a Supreme Court judge, during the vetting said something of the veil that, incurred the wrath of Muslims all over the country, saying that he doesn't think it's necessary to force Muslim women not to veil or to veil, that kind of thing. But that is it. So I think there's a certain level of consciousness and awareness that is emerging. And not just even Muslim, but even Rastafarians. Men who wear locked hair cannot practice certain professions like medicine, like law. In fact, even when they teach, they are stereotyped and stigmatized and all that. If you recall, again, was it last year or so, a young man somewhere in the Buta region who had been initiated into a religious practice and had to leave the hair in a locked manner, was almost denied admission to a senior high school. All right, and it took the intervention of the public, reining in on the school authority before he was readmitted. So we understand, I think the biggest question is how do you deal with difference? How do you deal with something different than what you know? Or how do you deal with the religious difference? How do you deal with the ethnic difference or ethnic order? I think that is, for me, the biggest question. Now, the question of looking smart and beauty, again, it falls into the philosophy of aesthetics. How do you know you are beautiful? And that's the biggest question in philosophy. So whether it is a Platonic beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder or not, at least let individuals express their beauty as they find it, and let no one impose their sense of beauty on anyone. I have a friend, many Muslim guys, who actually fall for Muslim women because they are veiled. Yeah, and I naturally love women to wear the veil. Naturally, I love such women. You know, I'm saying this quietly because I don't want my wife to hear, but that's the point. You see, so I think we should define the idea of beauty in ways that do not, you know, subject others to discrimination and stigmatization. So long as it does not affect their productivity, I don't see why there should be qualms around it. Mr. Abudu.
Just, I don't know whether this question, you will be able to manage it, but I struggle with religion, almost every religion. That has got so much to do with hair, right? If you look at Sikhs, they don't cut their hair, they have to tie it. Judaism, those who actually are what is strong into Judaism, the women shave their hair and wear wig. Only the husbands can see their bald hair in the house. Then you talk about Rastafarian, they also don't cut the hair. And then Hindu, they shave the hair. So what is religion and hair? I just can't get it. Can you explain it to me?
I unfortunately, you see, of course, I've read the various world religions, including Sikhism and other religions, Hinduism. Of course, all these names are coinages that we have given to them, because technically they never named themselves by the names we give them. But like I said, the hair, you know, that's why I began by talking about the hair as a cultural signifier or as a cultural construct, so that the hair is not just a biological species or just a biological thing, but it's also you know, something that is constructed. Remember, I talked about the fact that human beings are meaning-seeking beings and meaning-making beings. So the hair then becomes very pronounced in terms of how religions are shaped, precisely because if you take many cultures, the beauty of a woman is defined differently. All right. In some cultures, it is the hair. So they say, the glory of a woman is the hair. And they want to quote from the Bible. And that is precisely what the Church of Pentecost did. So that for a very long time, until 2010, Church of Pentecost never allowed women to enter the church without covering their hair. I have a chapter of a book that has been published on Church of Pentecost and that kind of reform. Now, and now the question is, why did the church in 2010 have to take such a dramatic initiative, right, to make sure women freely go to church, whether they wear the veil or they don't wear the veil? And precisely because they realized that the test they were dependent on was not that straightforward. And that test itself didn't have a simple, uniform, universally appealing interpretation. And then the other thing for me, which was very pragmatic, was that the church has spread to over 100 countries, including countries that do not even, women wear trousers and all that. So if the church wanted to stick to cover your hair, how would that happen in winter? For example, in the UK or in England? You know, so for me, it was what we call theological pragmatism, right? Where you take a decision, not necessarily because the Bible says yes or no, but because it helps even in your own mission as a religious group. And to be honest with you, with all these religions, it is also the question of identity. All right, they want to stand out among the lot. And that's precisely what religion does to us. You have to stand out among the many. So how would I know somebody's a Sikh? How would I know somebody, you know, shares affiliation with Rastafarianism, right? Which, of course, that I say, in fact, Rastafarianism started because it was a social protest in Jamaica against European factories because they were forced to shave. And they said, no, we won't do it. We are protesting, so we are going to leave our hair. And then when Akibal Duncan and co went to Ethiopia, the 1930s, and got to know about Haile Selassie, now we are going to add religion to it. So for me, hair is a cultural construct that has signification for how societies are organized. In Islam, when the child is born, the child is shaved. All right. I've asked many Muslim scholars, why is that practice? Many of them is a sunnah of the Prophet. In other words, it's a practice of the Prophet. Now, one scholar came closer saying that, well, we think it's because it carries dirt, so it must be shaved, off. But whatever it is, religions make sense of the human person and society as well. Lynn, do you have comments?
I was reflecting on the hair question, and I was thinking it's not just religion, as Charles Prempeh said concerning Rastafarians, but just even the whole movement, around the politics of kinky hair, right? And all of that. So I think, yeah, definitely there's a lot, and then even beyond that, commercially, right? Look at all kinds of products, right, that have been designed, produced to, dye your hair, perm your, like all kinds of things, all kinds of types of hair, and then wigs, and then what having hair, a lot of hair, a certain type of texture of hair, or having no hair does, depending on what it signifies at different along one's life, with regard also to disease or the lack thereof, and it's just hair can be politicized. Hair can be it's versatile, right? It can be appropriated in a variety of ways, and I think, yeah, there's definitely what Prempeh shared about meaning making, but I think hair, I don't know why, but there's definitely a lot that can happen with it, whether it's a statement or not. And it can be individualized as well as, shared within a community, whether it be a social, political, religious one. And yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting question, but I think it goes beyond religion.
Yeah, in fact, let me add that during the slave trade era, one way Europeans humiliated enslaved Africans was to have their hair shaved. Yeah. So when they got to the New World, they were forced to shave their hair. You see, it was a way to humiliate them. So hair, yes, is very, very important. In fact, there's a paper I've worked on Muslim youth constructing their identity, focusing on those who smoke marijuana. And I talked about how these Muslim youth, use their hair and their styles and all that to communicate their own subjective identities.
I wanted to ask something, Prempeh, about the hijab. I mean, when you were sort of talking about, the different ways in which different cultures within Ghana and I guess across West Africa employ head coverings. And I was sort of wondering why it is that with the hijab, it's so political, as compared to, say, to, how do you call them? Is it jele in Nigeria? That women wear for a festive or, special occasions, or even when Debbie, you're talking about Baumya's wife. I mean, there are different kinds of head coverings she's got that, you would not necessarily think it's Muslim, right? That it's not necessarily. So I'm just thinking about what is it about the hijab specifically that, sends a certain message that then becomes that it's supposed to be private, right? Because of this idea of, what secularization does in terms of religion being restrained to the private sphere. But it's like discussions around the hijab become, enter the public sphere and become political. So I'm just wondering, what is it about, the hijab, even when Muslim communities haven't said anything, right? Just the wearing of that becomes incredibly political in a way that, you know, a woman, you know, I don't know, attending, you know, even a church service, right? Especially again, Nigeria, Benin, but even increasingly in Ghana, Ivory Coast, wearing, you know, a fancy hat or a fancy sort of, you know, like that's okay. It's marveled at, it's beautiful. It's part of her attire. It's part of her femininity. But it's not politicized necessarily in the same way. So.
Yeah, okay, let me answer it this way. So you see, when Clash of Civilization, which you know, Samuel Huntington, right? Clash of Civilization. Now, that concept itself has been developed in ways that says that, look, the next conflict of the world will not be a political conflict, but religious conflict, okay? And I think, in a way, it is a certain level of Islamophobia, right, that people have of Islam, as it were. And then also, many people think that the hijab represents a certain level of a relapse into first century, I'm using my word as a primitive type of Islam, right? So they think, hey, Islam is re-emerging. How is it re-emerging? It is re-emerging as fundamentalism, as hardcore, hardline Islam. And remember that it is one of the most visible aspects of the religion. Okay, so it is then easy because it is, in fact, the gele, which you mentioned of the Nigerian and every Pentecost woman wearing a certain hat, it doesn't have any direct association with religion. You know, its symbolism is not religious, but for the veil, its symbolism is said to be religion. And so people see the veil as coterminous to religious resurgence, right? And that in itself is a challenge to many people, precisely because they think Islam is rising. Islam is taking over the world. So people, there's that kind of paranoia people have. How do we stop Islam from taking over the world? You know, some religious eschatologies tend to, you know, direct hatred towards Islam, you know, and all that. But I want to believe that it's also the narrative for feminism, right? So-called radical feminists, Mary Daly, McIntosh, and how they construct what should be of a woman. So a woman should be that free woman. It's like the libertarians of whether John Stuart Mill or Jeremy Bentham. You must be totally free. And so according to Jeremy Bentham, for example, and then John Stuart Mill, you are not free if you do what religion asks you to do. All right. So for many of these feminist, you know, writers, the veil shows how the Muslim woman is unfree, as it were, and shows how she's suppressed. And that is why my paper says that instead of seeing it that way, why don't you see it as the way they are redeploying it in terms of the sartorial value of it? You know, so I think, one, it is the Islamophobia. Two, it is also the radical feminism. Three, it is the misunderstanding of Islam as rising as political Islam. You see, now people talk about political Islam. So the veil becomes a mark of fundamentalism and political Islam that must be suppressed. And that's, for me, is why there's so much tension. And that's why my paper says that, no, instead of looking at it from that perspective, let's relook it. Let's look at how it is the women themselves are using it. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just going on here, but when I was listening to you, I was just thinking, so there's this new paper or course it's an option course in African Studies called African Intellectual History. But really, I mean, the content, so this is convened by Dr. Natasha Shivji, Professor Shivji's daughter. Yeah. So, but it's interesting because it's really African Islamic intellectual history, and it's interesting. I mean, I was just listening and I was thinking, wow, because that's a perspective we don't really have, right, in terms of how you know, as you describe yourself, Zongo man, like what's happening there in terms of links to the Arab world, right? And how they themselves conceive of the seat of Islam, right? Of proper, or, proper Islam. And I'm saying this because of the kinds of conversations we've been having about, this sort of the form of Islam that has, as I really like the way you historicized it, the sort of Islam that has evolved in, let's say Africa south of the Sahel, well, from the Sahel down, as opposed to the Maghreb. And I was really sort of, it's more of a comment really, but sort of, I would have been interested to see what kinds of conversations could be sort of coming out in terms of, again, the formations, the kinds of links that are emerging as, people are going off to study in the Arab world and coming back with this sort of, it's almost like we've deviated. We need to return to the pure form.
I sincerely think that one thing about religion is that it keeps evolving, okay? How people understand religion is not static, it's very osmotic, very osmotic and very dynamic. Now, the only difference is that if you look at Islam, when people, in fact, there's tension even within Islam, not tension like fighting, but there's intellectual battle going on within Islam. So if you read, that's why I mentioned Amina Wadud, and in fact, even Lila Abu Lugod. And if you read people like the 14th century Ibn Khaldun, or if you read even Ali Mazuri, who unfortunately is gone. But if you read these Islamic thinkers, you notice that they were arguing for a certain level of modernization, right? A type of modernization that in itself is not a deviation, but that is also helpful to the Muslim himself or herself, and I want to believe, even the same with Christianity, evangelization or evangelicalism, where some people think that we need to revisit the first century Christianity. Let's recapture the specter of the church in the days of Jesus Christ or the church in the days of the apostles. Now, I think the problem with those narratives is that there has never been a perfect Christian regime or a golden age for Christianity. And there has equally not been a perfect golden age for Islam either. In fact, if you read the book of Corinth, you see the mess in the church, right? The mess, all sort of dubious things going on in the church way back at that time, first century. So when people say that, let's go to the prophetic era, let's go to the Medina era, let's go to the Jerusalem era, what specifically are they talking about? Since that in itself is not there. Because that eras had their own complications and problematics and difficulties. So I want to believe that, yes, once in a while, you have people who want to reform a certain religion. That is why every religion then has splinter groups, whether in Hinduism, whether in Sikhism, whether in Buddhism, because they all have a group of people who think that, look, something is wrong. Let's recapture the past. Let's bring the past back. And in terms of what we just mentioned about Muslim intellectuals, there's a new project by Usman, this Nigerian scholar who talks about the Timbuktu.
Is it Beyond Timbuktu?
Yeah, Beyond Timbuktu, right?
Khan, yeah.
Usman Khan. And what Usman Khan is arguing is that we should move away from the colonial library that Budimbe talked about. And instead, let's go to Timbuktu, let's go to Arabic. So I have problem with that solution too. Because all those things were prejudiced and biased in many ways. So that is what I would say to your comment. I think our time is fast spent.
Does anybody else have any pressing questions? Okay. Okay, well.
Built a public toilet in front of the hospital and it's uncompleted. That is something, for 60 years, that's the only structure he has built in his.
I think that's somebody's background noise. Okay. All right, so Prempeh, this was very informative. I mean, very well researched. Yeah, I'm sure I'll be thinking about this and have other questions to ask you later. If anybody else does, feel free to reach out to Prempeh. I'm sure he'll be able to answer them. Thank you so much for kicking this off. If anyone else is interested in presenting, we're still deciding whether we'll be able to have another seminar series event this term, because it will end up being out of term. Catherine, would you like to speak to that? Catherine is our events coordinator.
Yeah, so most likely it will be Lent term that we continue doing seminar series, and we'll try to continue doing it fortnightly and start a lot earlier in Lent term than we did this term. Yeah.
Thank you. Great. So we have our next event coming up next week, our Ghana Go-Getters event with Jessica Poku, who is the current country manager of Uber, formerly of Google C Squared. So essentially the idea behind Ghana Go-Getters was just to bring in someone who is doing something innovative in Ghana, and yeah, basically ask them how they got to where they've gotten to. So it's pretty much a free forum for us to ask questions and yeah, just see what sort of opportunities are back home. I think that's something that we really want to encourage amongst ourselves. So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us. Let me just say that after that, we will have our Bronya Trivia Night on December 2nd. So look forward to that as well. So yes, Ghana Go-Getters on the 25th of November. I will see you all there. Please tell a friend, and we'll keep you updated on WhatsApp and Facebook.
Incidentally, I have my primary and JSS mates also joining the platform. So Isaka, thank you.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah, he is a senior military officer. He trains soldiers and he's been in the army for many years now.
Wow, wow.
Yeah. I'm writing something about him. He was a fan of Rollins.
The former special prosecutor made against his life since
He joined the army because of Rollins.
The president has since directed.
Yes, it has a part per se. He motivated us, so it's also a factor.
Yes, I know. I'll talk about
it.
it.
It's a factor. Yeah.
Talk about the legacy of Rollins, but I think it was recorded. We'll try and put it up. We're
so that they can be dealt with in accordance with the law.
Yes. So thank you guys again.
Bye.
It was great. I hope everyone has a good evening.
Good evening. Bye-bye.
Everybody, goodbye. Take care.
Bye.
They said bye-bye in my other meeting. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Stephalina.
I was having the meeting concurrently.
Oh, that's great. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.